What's going on, everybody? My name is Bill Welker. You're listening to MMA on the Rocks, episode number 53. Today is Sunday, June 18th, Father's Day. So happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there, including my father, if you're listening. I was talking to you earlier today anyway. I already wished you a happy Father's Day, so I don't need to do it publicly, but I will anyway. So I hope everybody's enjoying their Father's Day. Typically, I'm joined by my co-host, Jeff the Animal Wilson. However, this weekend, Jeff the Animal Wilson turned into Jeff the Party Animal Wilson. He went to a concert last night and overdid it on the partying a little bit. I heard from him early this morning, and I haven't heard from him since. If anybody has heard from Jeff Wilson on Twitter or elsewhere, somebody let me know that he's okay. I think he's just sleeping off a rough night. I sent him the link to join me here on the podcast. We're live on YouTube, of course. For those of you who subscribe on YouTube, thank you. For those of you who don't, if you want to check out the unedited version of MMA on the Rocks, you can subscribe on YouTube and they'll send you a notification when we go live. I haven't really been advertising it much, but you know, if you want it live, then subscribe on YouTube. So hopefully Jeff is able to join us. If not, you guys are just stuck with me for this episode. So I apologize for that. But we're going to get into some fun things and talk about UFC Fight Night 111, obviously, which took place last night in Singapore. Before I get into all that, there was some very sad news over the weekend. Unfortunately, former UFC heavyweight Tim Hague, the thrashing machine, passed away after getting knocked out in a boxing match in his hometown of Edmonton, Canada. And just a really horrible thing to hear. He was declared brain dead not long after getting knocked out, and he was knocked down a couple of times in the first round of the match. And you know, that's a big problem with boxing is the standing 8 counts and allowing guys to continue to get hit in the head after they've been concussed. And of course, it's such a difficult job being a referee in a combat sport and having to make that decision of telling a fighter, very testosterone driven, sometimes easily agitated fighter that they can't continue. It's a tough spot to be in. So unfortunately, he continued fighting and he was KO'd and he didn't wake up. Looking over his MMA record in his last 5 fights, he was knocked out, unfortunately, in 4 of them. So, that's the danger of participating in these combat sports and things like that. And we're hearing more and more about concussions and guys sparring too heavy and taking unnecessary blows to the head. So you can never really tell if that was the issue, if he was training too hard and taking a lot of concussions in the gym or whatever the case. But when he was getting in the cage and getting in the ring for MMA and boxing, obviously he's taken a lot of blunt trauma to the head. So of course, sympathies go out to the family, Tim Hague. It's just, you don't know what to say at this point. It's really difficult. Young guy, 33 years old, obviously really high caliber athlete. He went 1-4 in the UFC, but even making it to the UFC really speaks to the caliber of talent that you are. And yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough thing to hear about. So, as big of fans as we are of this sport, obviously we don't want to see anybody hurt or killed or have permanent damage from this. And, it's an unfortunate reality of this sport that we love so much. Another piece of sad news, I hate to keep this as a downer for the start of the show, but former UFC welterweight champion Matt Hughes was in a bad car accident. His car was hit by a train. He drove across some train tracks in his hometown, and a train connected with the passenger side of the car. Luckily, nobody was sitting in the passenger seat. And he's in stable condition right now, but last I read, he is still not conscious. So all the best to Matt Hughes and his family, and we hope for a speedy recovery. He was actually talking very recently about making a comeback to MMA. I believe he retired in 2013, so he's been away for a long time. And it's been a reoccurring theme, especially on this show. We've been talking a lot about guys who walked away a long time ago from this sport, but they don't really know what to do with themselves. He had a job with the UFC that was kind of loosely defined, and nobody really knew what he was doing. And when WME took over, they let Matt Hughes go. So I guess he was toying with the idea of a comeback. And it's sad to see when these guys, don't really have another outlet beyond fighting, and they feel like that's what they have to continue to do. At the same time, that kind of mentality is what breeds champions, and that's why Matt Hughes is one of the greatest champions of all time. So obviously not a fight-related injury, but just a terrible accident. So sympathies to the Hughes family, and we hope that he has a speedy recovery and a full recovery, and not necessarily, to get back into the MMA syndicate, but just to live a healthy life. That's what we'd like to see for people like Matt Hughes, who have given so much to the sport. I mean, over 50 professional MMA fights, and a couple of times over world champion. Really one of the legends of the sport. So yeah, really sad news to kick off on this Father's Day episode. So unfortunately, we have to talk about some more head trauma with the main event of UFC Fight Night 111 last night, which the main event was Holly Holm and Bethe Correia, two women's bantamweight fighters who have both contended for titles. Holly Holm has been the champion at 135 pounds. She contended for the title at 145 pounds in her last fight and was unsuccessful, even though a lot of people thought she should have won that fight because her opponent, Germaine de Randamie, took some cheap shots, hitting her after the bell and things like that. And, some people thought Holly won by points anyway. But back at 135 pounds, the common opponent between these two, of course, was Ronda Rousey. And both of their fights with Ronda Rousey ended in similar fashion. Of course, Holly Holm, the famous head kick knockout of Ronda Rousey, which put her momentum train to a screeching halt. And Bethe Correia was knocked out very quickly in the first round against Ronda Rousey, I think in 48 seconds or so. So this fight ended with a devastating head kick knockout in the third round that was delivered to Bethe Correia after she started taunting Holly Holm and kind of waving her to come on and doing some kind of silly dance and dropping her hands and saying, like, let's go. And Holly said, okay. And she just unleashed some sweet chin music on Bethe's face. And man, the videos and the memes and everything else have been relentless for Bethe Correia. And a lot of people, I guess, people think it's justified because, she was taunting her and, she got what was coming to her. Like, you don't do that. And when you do, you got to be ready for the consequences. And the consequences were pretty severe for Bethe in this fight. And, both of these girls had the right game plan. Holly, of course, is a counter striker, one of the best counter strikers in the sport of MMA, in my opinion. So she came out very tentative. She was throwing a lot of feints. And Bethe Correia had the right game plan, because usually Bethe is known for rushing in on her opponents, and counter strikers do very well against Bethe Correia because she gives them a lot of momentum to throw back in her face. So Bethe came out very tentative as well, which was the right game plan for Holly Holm. It made for a very uninteresting main event for the first 2 rounds because they circled each other. Holly was throwing a lot of feints. Bethe wasn't really engaging. And this was not a game that Bethe was going to win. It was a matter of who blinked first, who caved on the game plan first. And, given the style of these 2 women, Holly Holm obviously has no problem being patient. She would have carried on that same game plan into the 5th round with no problem and pitter-pattered her way to a unanimous decision victory if she had to. Bethe, although she had the right game plan, she got impatient. She wanted Holly to come in and engage so she could work her clinch and work her close range striking, which she's great at. She's a very aggressive striker. She's got a lot of power. But she wasn't able to lure Holly in. Holly stayed very patient and stayed on the outside and used her range to keep Bethe away. And, Bethe blinked first. She started taunting Holly and dropped her hands and let her guard down. And Holly saw that opening and jumped on it. And, that head kick is becoming kind of a trademark for her. Obviously, the head kick against Ronda Rousey, and then some of her fights before she was in the UFC, she's used that same head kick and just goes right over the hand that's kind of protecting the face. The Jackson Winklejohn gym, sure a lot of you know, which is where Holly Holm trains, Greg Jackson's gym. They posted something on Instagram. It said, "Who wore it better?" And it was pictures of Holly kicking Ronda Rousey, and right under it was Holly kicking Bethe Correia. And they justified it by saying that both of these women were very mean to Holly Holm before they fought. So justified or not, that's what they did. And Holly Holm in a very interesting situation now, because this is a fight that she was supposed to win. They were kind of setting her up to get back on track here. And that's what she did. It's difficult to say what to do with her now. I don't think you can give her a title shot because she's coming off of 3 losses. But then again, she was given a title shot at 145 pounds after having 2 straight losses, even though she wasn't even part of that weight class. So who knows what they're going to do with Holly Holm. I think maybe one more fight before she challenges for the title, which is going to be up in the air very soon. Amanda Nunes is going to be defending her title against Valentina Shevchenko. And that's a rematch against a very close fight. So that'll be an exciting one. We'll see what happens there. And depending who wins, I think Holly Holm against either one of those women would be a really great matchup. Maybe let her take on the loser of that fight would be one strategy. And, the winner can maybe fight for the title again. I don't know. But yeah, so pretty awesome finish for Holly Holm. She did her trademark backflip in the cage, and she was real excited, put on a show for the Singapore crowd who was kind of falling asleep after those first 2 rounds. I saw something that said there were only 8 significant strikes landed or something like that in the first round. So not too thrilling, but definitely a spectacular finish. And this one was on early in the morning on Saturday. For those of you who woke up early enough, I believe I'm on the East Coast in the United States here. So I think the early prelims started at 4:30 a.m. And I know some people were staying up all night watching movies and drinking and having fun, doing whatever, and they were falling asleep, by the time the card rolled around. I didn't do that. I woke up in time for the main card, and I watched the main card, and then I went back and watched some of the other stuff on Fight Pass and just kind of played catch up a little bit. Some people had fun with it, waking up early or staying up all night or whatever you did to watch this card. And other people were complaining, saying, why can't it be prime time here. But in order for that to happen, if the fight's in Singapore, they would have to be fighting in the morning there, which can be rough on the fighters. And then, the fans on the other side of the world deserve to have a card that takes place during prime time as well. So it's nice for the Singapore fans and the other fans in Asia and that side of the world to get that experience. I've talked about it a couple of times on the show. I went to UFC Fight Night in Japan coming up on 2 years ago now, and it was in the morning. So it was at the Saitama Arena, the famous Saitama Arena where many Pride events have taken place. And I had to go in the morning. It started like 8 o'clock in the morning so it could air prime time here in the States. And it was interesting because, you're in there and it's dark in the stadium. And of course you're having some beers, watching the fights, or I was anyway, because that's how I watch the fights, as you well know, if you're a fan of the podcast. And then you come outside and it's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon and it's bright out, and I'm jet lagged because we had just gotten to Japan like 2 days earlier, or maybe a day earlier. So it was kind of trippy, but it was pretty cool too. Definitely a unique experience. It was one of the most awesome live events I've ever been to. If you ever have the opportunity to go to Japan and witness an MMA event there, I would highly recommend that, or just go to Japan in general. But that's a conversation for another time. Let's get into the rest of this card here. So the co-main event was between Andre the Pitbull Arlovsky. So Bethe Correia's nickname is also the Pitbull. So it was not a good night for anyone named Pitbull in Singapore. Unanimous decision loss to Marcin Tybura, who is a, big tough heavyweight. He's had some impressive fights, very explosive in the first round of his fights, and not the best cardio, because that's not really what heavyweights are known for. I think a lot of people thought Arlovsky would have the advantage if this fight went into deep waters, but a lot of people also questioning Arlovsky's chin, which I don't think is fair, really. If you think about, the people he had lost to of late, Stipe Miocic, the current heavyweight champion, and some other heavy hitters who had knocked him out, you kind of got to give him a pass on a couple of those knockouts. Arlovsky's just a fucking warrior, man. And even the first round of this fight really spoke to it, because Tybura had Arlovsky on the ground. He had him mounted. He was swinging some big, heavy bombs, and Arlovsky was still moving around. And the last 15 or 10 seconds of the round, he got up and he was right in Tybura's face. And you could see Tybura was like, oh, shit. This guy is still in the fight, and he's just so tough. I mean, Arlovsky's one of these guys. He's been around forever, multiple-time UFC heavyweight champion. He's gone and fought in other organizations and fought all over the world, made his way back to the UFC. So many ups and downs in his career, but the guy's just a fighter, man. He just needs to fight. His face is all smashed in. His nose is smushed. It looks like it's made out of clay, or like it's taped down to his face, like Jim Carrey in that Yes Man movie when he puts all the tape around his head and he's like goofing around with the guy who works at the bank. And like, that's Arlovsky's nose all the time. Like, his sinuses are just like not even a passageway anymore. It's just like a smashed in, like, I don't know if there's even sinuses in there anymore. He may not even be able to breathe through that nose, but damn it, is he fucking tough. So, Arlovsky losing the decision there. Would I say that he would have to be done at this point? I would not. I think there are still fights out there for Andre Arlovsky. Some of these guys, like, putting him in there against Francis Ngannou, obviously that was a rough go for him, because that kid is a monster. He's tearing through everybody. I think there are fights for him out there, and I would like to see that. I would like to see Arlovsky back, and Marcin Tybura. He should have steamrolled Arlovsky in that first round. if he wanted to seriously be a contender. And I'm getting a text from Jeff the Animal Wilson right now, which is why I look so distracted right now. He's texting and telling me to wait for him. Let me just answer him and tell him that we're live. And, he shouldn't have been taking a nap. So I'll move down the card. A fight that a lot of people were pissed off about, Dong Hyun Kim and Colby Covington. Colby Chaos Covington, teammate of Jorge Masvidal. And a lot of people were annoyed with Covington holding Dong Hyun Kim down for a lot of this fight. I didn't really see it that way. I didn't actually agree that it was that boring of a fight. Obviously, we know Dong Hyun Kim is very dangerous. He's got really explosive hips, and he's super strong for that weight class. I thought it was impressive that Colby Covington was able to control him for the entire fight, and he did not gas out. For those of you who have done some grappling or wrestling, you know how exhausting it can be. And many times we've heard Brian Stan say this on a lot of broadcasts, that offensive wrestling is the most exhausting thing in MMA. And that's accurate. Wrestling is so tiring because your arms fill up with blood and, you're trying to hold down another human being who's equally as strong or stronger than you. We know how explosive Dong Hyun Kim can be. And the fact that Colby Covington was able to hold him down or hold him against the cage, and then when they separated, Colby still had the faster hands, which is really incredible if you think about it, because his arms must have been filled with lactic acid and filled with blood and feeling so heavy. And he just, he still had fast hands after Dong Hyun Kim was able to make some space, and he was able to avoid the judo. I always say that, wrestling hips will usually prevail over judo hips, especially in MMA where there's no gi, because judo players are not used to people, having a low center of gravity, because in judo, you're a little bit more light on your feet and a little bit more top heavy. So when you have wrestlers who are known for lowering their center of gravity, and kind of planting to the ground a little bit more, judo players have a little bit more difficulty kind of throwing them around. So I think a lot of people were bored with this fight, which I can understand. I still thought it was an interesting fight. Just knowing what I know about Dong Hyun Kim and how strong he is and how hard he is to hold down, the fact that Colby Covington was able to hold him down for the entire fight was very impressive. Not impressive enough to warrant a title shot, which is what he was asking for in the post-fight interview. And he had a couple of pocketed statements that were kind of clumsily written. And he was saying, this is my division and I'm taking over, even though Jorge Masvidal was in his corner, who's, a guy in the same division and clearly ranked higher than Colby Covington. But Colby's calling out Tyron Woodley, which I think would actually be a really interesting fight, because I can't see him holding Tyron Woodley against the cage for 5 rounds or taking him down and holding him down on the canvas, because Woodley's so explosive. That would actually be a really interesting fight. Now, again, people who are not interested in wrestling may think it's boring. I think it's really interesting. And, it would really be a test for Colby Covington to see whether or not he could take the power of Tyron Woodley. Now, all that being said, that's just me kind of bouncing around the idea of those two fighting. I don't think he's deserving of a title shot by any means, but I would like to see him in there with some top 10 fighters, and let's see how he does. The fight right before that was, another mix-up in the same division, 170 pounds. So former lightweight champion Rafael dos Anjos made his welterweight debut against Tarek Safadine, who is a really established kickboxer, Muay Thai fighter, and he did well in other organizations before coming over to the UFC. But he hasn't had the best of luck since coming to the UFC. And this is the problem with guys who specialize in one style of fighting. So he's a striker, a kickboxer, and he was getting outstruck by Rafael dos Anjos. So what do you do when you're so good at something and somebody is doing it better than you, but they're also more well-rounded than you? Well, the answer is you lose the fight. So Tarek Saffiedine lost unanimous decision to RDA. He's got more power in his striking. Obviously, Tarek Saffiedine is very precise and very technical with his striking. But he wasn't able to keep up with Dos Anjos, and Dos Anjos has a much better ground game. Obviously, he's got some jiu-jitsu credentials to his name, and he's got some good wrestling. So this was an okay fight, but Dos Anjos, coming away with the win, he looked good. He looked really filled out at 170 pounds. I think he can go pretty far in this division. I don't know how he would match up with some of the upper echelon guys there. Maybe a fight with Kobe Covington would be interesting because, he's got the jiu-jitsu to counter the wrestling. He's got big power that can catch a wrestler coming in. He's got really fast hands. He'll be real quick in that division because he had fast hands at 155 pounds when he was depleting himself to make weight. So I think RDA being at 170 is a good move. Donald Cerrone is probably like, fuck, how do I get away from this guy? Because he fought for the title against RDA in Orlando a couple of years ago now. And got knocked out there. That was his second loss to him. So he moved up to 170 pounds. And then obviously RDA lost the belt to Eddie Alvarez. And then he lost to Tony Ferguson. So he decided to move up to 170 pounds. So this is a really exciting division right now. And we have, speaking of Cowboy Cerrone, we have him fighting Robbie Lawler coming up real soon. And that's an amazing fight. So, a lot of eyes on the 170 pound division right now. And, I think it's really exciting. I think it's one of the most exciting divisions right now to watch. Even though, the last title fight between Tyron Woodley and Stephen Thompson was, aptly declared one of the most boring fights of all time. It was kind of interesting to watch at the time because there was so much tension, and that kind of made it interesting. But not a whole lot happened except for like a 40-second explosion by Tyron Woodley in the fourth round, I believe. So anyway, big win for Dos Anjos, and Tarek Saffiedine. I don't know what you do with him. I don't know if he gets cut. He doesn't really have name recognition with a lot of fans, except for the hardcore fans who were following before he came into the UFC. But with casual fans, he doesn't have that name recognition. So he's got to go back to, back to the drawing board, back to the undercard, back to Bellator. I don't know what you do with him, or back to fighting the kids from Hogwarts and Harry Potter, because I think he looks like the Lord Voldemort from the Harry Potter movies. If you follow on Instagram at MMA on the Rocks, I made a meme kind of dubbing Tarek Saffiedine's face with Lord Voldemort. So if you follow on Instagram, you may have seen that one. And that's just what I think of when I look at him. He's just got like that face. He's got that kind of like evil, like vampire-y looking face to him. He's kind of a scary looking dude. And I think, if he comes back, great. I'll watch him fight again. But if the UFC does decide to cut him, I think this is, I think he's lost 3 out of 4, 3 of his last 4, something like that. I don't have it in front of me, but so another unfortunate fight was John Tuck versus Takanori Gomi. Takanori Gomi, another legend of the sport, another one of these guys who just can't walk away. I mean, he was one of the heroes of Pride, and the Fireball Kid. He was so exciting. Amazing knockout power, great wrestler, total legend. The Pride Bushido events. You go back to so many legendary fights with Takanori Gomi, but he got submitted by John Tuck early in the first round by a rear naked choke. So you got to wonder, if it's time for him to maybe hang it up. And man, it's tough because these guys who you watch and you watch them be so dominant for so long, and then they just don't know what to do with themselves. It gets kind of sad. So, in any case, let's take good for John Tuck though, because he's able to put a legend on his resume that he was able to beat. Another rear naked choke victory. Yuta Sasaki chokes out Justin Scoggins in the second round of their fight. And this was a real scrappy one. These guys were tossing each other around. Scoggins is a very, very aggressive fighter. He's throwing spinning wheel kicks, and he's trying to suplex Sasaki. Very back and forth. Very interesting fight, but Sasaki was able to mount Scoggins, get his back, and choke him out. Justin Scoggins, though, has missed weight in his last couple of fights, and a lot of people kind of giving him shit for that. And he's fighting at 125 pounds, which is a very controversial division right now. A lot of people, kind of bringing up the idea that maybe this division shouldn't even exist anymore. So there's that. And I'm not going to touch on any other fights on this card. If Jeff ends up calling in, then maybe he saw some of these that he wants to touch on. But Walt Harris with a big TKO in the first round of his fight over Cyril Asker, and Alex Caceres also, Bruce Leroy with a win on this card. But that was at like 4:00 in the morning. So I wound up rewatching those. I didn't watch them live, so I don't feel like I can really give a fair assessment unless I see it live. So that was UFC Fight Night 111 from Singapore. So before I get into the Fight Night next week that's going down, something that's been big news, and you haven't heard too much about it on this podcast, and that's been somewhat intentional. Because I feel like people are sick of hearing about it. And that's Conor McGregor boxing Floyd Mayweather, which they signed the contract. This fight is happening August 26th in Las Vegas. It's going to happen at 147 pounds. And no, I'm sorry. 154 pounds. My mistake. I was thinking about something else. I'm distracted, obviously. In any case, so Floyd Mayweather is going to box Conor McGregor. Floyd Mayweather, 49-0 in boxing. Conor McGregor, 0-0 in boxing, 21-3 in MMA. So what I did was I put out a poll on Twitter, because I wanted to ask people who listen to this show, like, are you sick of hearing about this, or do you want to hear my take on it? Surprisingly, a lot of you want to hear what I have to say about it, and that's what won the poll. So here's what I'm going to do. Some of you said, please stick to MMA, and then the most vocal people actually messaged me and said, oh, and we're joined by the party animal, Jeff Wilson. So I'll finish this thought before I let Jeff jump in here and let us know why he abandoned all the fans on the show this week. So, Jeff, I was just telling everybody how I ran a poll on Twitter, and I asked if they wanted us to talk about the Floyd Mayweather Conor McGregor boxing match, or if they're sick of it. So a lot of people are sick of hearing about it. Some people wanted to hear the MMA on the Rocks take on this match. So what I decided to do is stick to MMA for the most part, and I'm going to do a separate episode talking about Floyd and Conor. I'll let you know my thoughts on it. I'm also inviting Blake Stevenson from the Loaded Joe's podcast. You guys have heard us talk about him before. I've appeared on his podcast. Blake is a big Floyd Mayweather fan, and he knows every fact about Floyd and all of his fights, and he's analyzed him endlessly. So I'm going to talk to him about this, and I'm going to make it a separate episode. So this way, those of you who wanted to hear my take on the Floyd Conor match can hear it. And those of you who wanted me to just stick to MMA and you're only interested in MMA on the rocks, not MMA and boxing and anything else on the rocks, you can choose to skip that episode if you want, and I won't be offended. But let me finally welcome my co-host, Jeff, the party animal Wilson, who, Jeff, I'm assuming you were catching up on some Z's because of you were hitting it pretty hard last night. So the audience is dying to know, where the fuck have you been?
Oh man, Bill, I much like our Lord and Savior Jesus, I died and have resurrected on the third day, Bill. Feels like I've been out for about 3 days. Yeah, dude. So last night, and this is kind of the reason I'm a little late to the party today, is I was partying last night. I went to go see one of my favorite bands called the Dirty Heads. And if you're a fan of bands like 311 or Sublime, you're probably going to like the Dirty Heads. They're all the same stuff. Trees Are Awesome and Summer Should Be Forever and all that. So, Bill, I basically drank everything. I finished the bottle of bourbon. Then we were doing Jello shots with vodka in them.
Okay.
Then I had, I don't even remember, I think like 3 or 4 Yinglings at the concert. I had a shot of Jack Daniels. And what else was there? And then we went to this club after the concert, and they had these rum buckets.
Oh man.
And they were like that. They were like maybe, I want to say like a quart or so of booze, and they mixed them with other stuff, so it tasted like orange juice. So I downed 2 of them by myself. And later that night, all of that stuff was on the bathroom floor. So
all right.
so
So you made it to the bathroom, but not necessarily to the toilet. Am I getting that right?
Right. Right. So I wake up this morning, and I'm at my friend's house, and I just look around, and I'm like, oh, you guys are gonna just have to move. Because,
oh, was that your friend's house that you threw up in the bathroom?
Yes, but I cleaned everything up, dude. Listen, I cleaned everything up, and it looked even cleaner than before I threw up in it.
Are you gonna be invited back though?
Of course. I mean, I cleaned up. I'm a trooper, man. Listen, my father always taught me, if you want to play, you got to pay. So,
yeah, some fatherly advice here on Father's Day.
Yeah. So, that was that. That's about all I remember.
All right. So you made it. For those watching on YouTube where I don't put the disclaimer, let me take this opportunity to say that we at MMA on the Rocks do not condone this type of drinking. Please drink responsibly if you're a listener of this show. For those who listen to the podcast on iTunes or anywhere else on your favorite podcast apps, you all hear the disclaimer in the beginning of the show. We do encourage you to drink responsibly. So do as we say, not as we do.
Yes, but in my defense, I did not drive. We had a designated driver, so that was cool. But yeah, every now and then, I mean, I don't drink like that often. Like I haven't drank like that maybe since I was in college.
Yeah.
But Well, every now and then it's cool to just have a good time and not think about stuff.
Yeah, every now and then you think like, oh, I can still hang like this, and you think about like what you used to do in college, and then you realize, no, I cannot. But you mentioned Yingling. You had a couple of those, and we've talked about them a couple of times on the show. I'm actually drinking a Yingling right now, and I'll
Well,
hold it
there
up
you
for the
go.
viewers on YouTube. This is a Yingling summer wheat, which is really nice. It's got like kind of a bit of a lemony flavor, and the wheat beers are a little bit heavier. So Yingling, the oldest operating brewery in the United States, they started out in Pottsville, Pennsylvania, and I've come to find out that only people on the East Coast really know what Yingling is. And our buddy Flying Brian J, who is a friend of the show, he has Flying Brian J a YouTube channel and podcast, and he also does YouTube craft beer reviews and things like that. So go check him out. I know we've plugged him on here a couple of times before. He just got a hold. He lives out in Nebraska, and he just got a hold of Yingling for the first time and tried it, and he really liked it. He said he knows a guy who will bring like cases of it. He'll come to the East Coast and drive back, I guess, to Nebraska and bring like cases of it with him because you can't find it anywhere else. So they started in Pennsylvania, and now they also brew here in Tampa. So they have a brewery in Tampa, Florida, which is why I was surprised when I moved to this area. I was going out to bars, and all the happy hours are like $2 Yinglings and $3 Yinglings or $8 pitchers of Yingling. I'm like, why is there so much Yingling around here? And I realized now they brew it in Florida. So that's awesome. It's like one of those. It's like a comfort beer, like a go-to, and it's Father's Day. I gotta have a beer. I have a dog, so I'm technically a father. Those of you who check out the Instagram stories, you'll see my dog Bijou on there quite often. So I consider myself a parent, so I deserve a beer on Father's Day. Jeff, I'm assuming you're not biting the little hair of the dog there after last night's escapades.
Bill, I'm never drinking again after yesterday, but I'm sure I'll be fine by Tuesday, and I'll be hitting the bottle again.
Oh, okay. So that's a pretty quick turnaround. Maybe by tonight you'll want a little sip. You'll be you'll find that bottle of Buffalo Trace and find those last couple of dewdrops in there. So Jeff, let me tell you what you missed. I went over the unfortunate news of former UFC fighter Tim Hague passing away. I don't know if you heard about this. He had a boxing fight in Edmonton, Canada. He suffered a KO loss, and unfortunately, he did not wake up from it. So, sympathies to the Hague family once again. And then also, I'll just give you everything I went over, and then you kind of bounce back to me, and we'll do it that way. I also went over Matt Hughes, former UFC champion, legend, Hall of Famer, got hit. His truck got hit by a train, and he is in a coma right now in stable condition. So the train hit the passenger side of his truck, and he was hospitalized. He was airlifted to the hospital, and he's currently not awake, but in stable condition. And I also went over the UFC Fight Night card from Singapore. I kind of just touched on the main card. So your reactions to Tim Hague, I'm assuming you didn't hear about Matt Hughes because I saw your face when I mentioned it. So let me get your reaction on those couple of things, and then let me hear a brief overview of your take on the Singapore card.
Yeah, dude, that is just horrible to hear about both Tim Hague and Matt Hughes. And as I was rewatching some of these fights, I had heard that something happened to Matt Hughes, but no one was saying anything specific. So I wasn't sure if it was like a family member or something, but after hearing what actually happened, that is horrible. And I feel really bad for these guys. They both have families, and it's horrible to hear stuff like that, man. So like my mouth, I know that when you're talking, it switches over to you, and when I'm talking, the video feed switches over to me. But yeah, my mouth hit the floor when you said that, man.
Yeah, for sure. And both super young. I mean, Tim Hague, 33, Matt Hughes, 43, I believe. So just both both tragedies. And unfortunately, in Tim Hague's case, I don't want to say it could have been avoided, because you never know with these situations. But that's a guy who has taken a lot of head trauma in MMA and boxing. I was saying, I think 3 out of his last 4 fights were knockout losses. And then he went over to do boxing, and who knows how hard the guy trains and how much head trauma he takes in the gym. So yeah, both really unfortunate cases, and our thoughts go out to their families. So speaking of head trauma, I already kind of broke down and gave my take on the main card of UFC Singapore. I didn't really get into the undercard too much, but I'll toss out a couple of fights to you, Jeff, and you give me your reactions. Obviously, the main event: Holly Holm and Bethe Correia. We had Marcin Tybura and Andrei Arlovsky, and Colby Covington, Dong Hyun Kim. Which one of those do you feel like is the most valuable to talk about again?
Unfortunately, I did not watch the Tybura versus Arlovsky fight,
Okay.
but Covington versus Dong Hyun Kim was really entertaining. I enjoyed it. It was interesting to watch. Like I said, really exciting fight. Colby Covington just using his wrestling and just nullifying Dong Hyun Kim's very, very ample striking ability by just, keeping him close range. And, Kim is a high-level judo guy, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So Covington, he did well, and I really found that fight entertaining. As for Holm versus Bethe Correia, Mark Goddard saved that fight, because up until he kind of chimed in, nothing was happening, and it was horrible. But that knockout came out of nowhere, man. Bethe Correia was egging Holly Holm on, and then she got the kick from hell. So
yeah, that's gonna be on highlight reels for the rest of time. And she's definitely going to regret taunting Holly Holm that way. And I'm glad to hear your take on the Colby Covington fight, because I had said the same thing. I thought it was so impressive that he was able to control Dong Hyun Kim, who is so strong and has such powerful hips from years of judo. I thought it was impressive he was able to hold him down. I think a lot of people disagreed and they thought that fight was boring. But if you know how strong Dong Hyun Kim is, and you know how exhausting it is to offensively grapple for 15 minutes, I thought it was a really impressive performance. Definitely not worthy of the title shot he was asking for, but I'd be interested to see him in there again. I wouldn't mind seeing him against Rafael dos Anjos, who had an impressive win over Tarek Safadine. And I'll let you talk about that fight if you want, Jeff. And was there anything else on the card that you saw and you want to mention real quick?
I didn't watch anything else on the card, unfortunately, but the Rafael dos Anjos versus Tarek Safadine fight was really good. Dos Anjos, after the first round, he looked great. Because he was being controlled at first. Credit to Tarek Safadine, because Dos Anjos, high-level jiu-jitsu guy, and he was taking it to him at the beginning of the first round, but after that, it was all Dos Anjos. Really entertaining fight. So if you missed that one, I would definitely go back and watch that again.
Cool. All right, so we'll move on from UFC Fight Night 111. Jeff, thank you for giving us your much anticipated breakdown after joining the podcast. And so something else that happened this weekend: Andre Ward getting a TKO victory over Sergey Kovalev. So this was a rematch of which Andre Ward had won a decision the first time they fought. This time it was a TKO in the 8th round. Referee stopped the fight while both men were standing due to body shots. So Andre Ward beating up the body of Kovalev, and Kovalev's corner thought that Ward had thrown some low blows during the match, and they're actually going to appeal this fight, which, good luck with that. That's not going to, there's no way that's going to happen. So Andre Ward, quietly establishing himself as one of the greatest boxers of our generation. He's super technical. His, just his basic instincts and his, his, what's the word I'm looking for? His technical skills are very sound. Like just the base, he focuses on the basics of boxing, and it's taken him very far. So impressive win for Andre Ward. I feel like this fight was not very publicized for a big time boxing match, which there are not very many of. I forgot this fight was even happening, and I didn't watch it. I saw like a recap, how they show the sped up recap, round 1, round 2, round 3, and round 8 it ended. I wasn't mad at the stoppage though. It looked like, Kovalev keeled over a couple of times and he didn't fall down, but he looks like a guy who didn't want to fight anymore to me. Did you hear anything about this fight, Jeff? And do you care? And if not, we can move on because we don't really talk about boxing here.
Yeah, I'm not crazy about it, but if you ever want to do an episode about Canelo Alvarez versus Triple G, I'm down for that. We could do that as a separate episode.
Yeah, maybe we'll just start a separate podcast to do boxing on the rocks. I'm not too well educated on boxing, if I'm being honest. I followed it in my youth. I was a big Bernard Hopkins fan back in the day. Unfortunate what happened to him. Speaking of guys who don't know when to hang it up, but in any case, yeah, I mean, this is MMA on the rocks. We're laid back here. We're not fucking getting too in depth about anything, talking about punch counts and like all these statistics and betting odds and all this shit. We just give our opinions and we drink beer and whiskey.
And anything else you put in front of us, Bill.
Apparently so, Jeff. Jeff the Jello shot Animal Wilson. But let's get back on track to some more MMA here. So we got Fight Night 112 coming up next week on the 25th of June, and this is in Oklahoma City. And it's headlined by Michael Chiesa and Kevin Lee. Now, normally nobody would give a fuck about this main event, to be honest, because these are not guys who are out in the public eye very much. Michael Chiesa, Ultimate Fighter winner, but, there's been 24 of those. So, needle in a haystack at this point. Soon to be 25, which, I'm actually a fan of this season of The Ultimate Fighter, I got to say. It started off kind of slow, but it grew on me. In any case, Chiesa and Kevin Lee, nobody would give a shit about this fight, if we're being honest, except for the fact that they got into it at a press conference, and Kevin Lee had some kind of scripted trash talk he was going to throw out there at the press conference, and he just casually said, like, I know Michael Chiesa's mother is going to be watching the fight. And Michael Chiesa totally flipped out and said, "Don't you fucking talk about my mother." And he ran across the stage of the press conference, and Kevin Lee punched him in the face. Now, I'm interested. Casual fans are interested. It's kind of a sloppy card backing this up. And we'll get into that in a second. But there's some emotions here and some bad blood, which always makes things more interesting. These guys have very similar records, and their styles match up very interestingly as well. Chiesa is awesome on the ground. Kevin Lee is an explosive wrestler, very aggressive. He's got some good ground skills too. What are your thoughts on this main event, Jeff? And do you think it's main event worthy if it were not for the mama drama?
That is a good question, Bill. I don't think it would be main event worthy were it not for the whole thing that happened on stage during that interview. But now that it did happen, I'm interested to see what happens. Nobody likes having their mom brought up, especially in that context.
Yeah.
Like you're gonna make my mom watch you beat me and stuff. Like nobody
Yeah.
likes that. So I'm really excited for that. And I don't know, Bill, I gotta disagree with you. I think this card looks pretty decent.
Dude, this is a big pile of what the fuck's going on here, because like you got you got you got the co-main event is BJ Penn and Dennis Seaver. Like, why is that happening? Then you got Johnny Hendricks and Tim Bosch, two guys who have been in every weight class from welterweight and up, meeting each other. You have Alir Latifi fighting somebody who we don't even know who it is yet. Clay Guida comes out of nowhere, back from the Stone Age. He's been like riding around the country. He's been riding around the country in an RV, and like all of a sudden he's stopping in Oklahoma to have a fight, and then you got Tim Means thrown in there. And then you got some decent female fights, but like, what the fuck is going on with this card? Because it's just like the most random assortment. It's like they just started drawing names out of a hat from guys who have ever fought in the UFC in the last 20 years and just kind of threw them together. Like what I have to know what's the strategy behind putting this card together? Like, all right, let's take the name out of the 45-pounders hat. Oh, BJ Penn, great. Let's draw another name out. Dennis Seaver. All right, now we need 185 pounds. Johnny Hendricks fights there now. Okay, how about Tim Bosch to fight him? Like, I don't know. I think there's some interesting matchups here. Alir Latifi may be fighting himself. Like, I don't know. I don't know what the fuck's going on. But I guess you see it differently, Jeff. So give me your thoughts on this card and which fight are you most excited about here?
Listen, BJ Penn versus Dennis Seaver. Sure, they're a little bit older, but hey, man, I want to see them fight. BJ Penn used to, be really entertaining. So I'm interested to see how he does against Dennis Seaver. Dennis Seaver, high-level wrestler. I think he's German or something. Yes. So, high-level wrestler. BJ Penn, high-level grappler in his own right. So that one should be interesting. Tim Bosch versus Johnny Hendricks. Come on, Bill. This is like two refrigerators running at each other. This is going to be awesome.
I don't really care to see appliance violence, Jeff. I could go on YouTube and watch rednecks shooting refrigerators with semi-automatic weapons if I were interested in such a thing. This just seems like a hot mess of a card to me, which kind of makes it more appealing. But at the same time, I'm looking at this card and I'm like, what the fuck? But so anything else jumped out to you on this one, Jeff?
The Tim Means fight looks pretty good against Alex Garcia. Felice Herring, usually a pretty entertaining fighter. Carlos Barza's coming back after about 6 years of retirement.
Yeah, no, almost having to sell her motorcycle that she won on the Ultimate Fighter for food.
Like, see, here's my thing, Bill, is you got to understand that, money comes from things like, working.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think this card's going to be cool, man. It doesn't look super appealing right out of the gate. But trust me, I think it's going to be good.
Yeah, and Carlos Esparza coming back to a really tough test, and Marina Moroz,
yes,
who Ukrainian fighter, which they're tough as fuck in the Ukraine. They're cut from a different cloth over there, and she's only got one loss on her record, and that's a unanimous decision loss to Valerie Letourneau. So Carlos Esparza kind of has to, come out guns blazing here. Felice Herring, another one who, aside from a loss to Paige Van Zandt in recent fights, she's won 2 in a row and she's right in there. Clay Guida, I'm always interested in watching. I would watch that guy, fight 30 homeless people at the same time, because he's just a fucking animal.
I don't know if you could tell who was who though.
It's true. Until the end of it, where there's 30 dead homeless guys and Clay Guida
Oh man.
flexing on top of his RV. um, yeah, I don't know how that guy never got a reality show with the, driving around in that thing. And then, yeah, so I maintain my opinion that this card's a fucking hot mess, but it'll be interesting. And this is a Sunday card, I believe. This is on, yeah, because next weekend is Bellator pay-per-view. So
Right. Yes.
Bellator, getting their first pay-per-view in a long time. I think it's the first one since Scott Coker took over as president. And, we got Chael Sonnen and Vanderlei Silva, huge grudge match there. We got Fedor Emelianenko and Matt Mitrione, a fight that was supposed to happen a couple of months ago, but Mitrione had kidney stones at the weigh-ins and wasn't able to make the appearance. We got some interesting fights on this card. I don't know that it's worth buying a pay-per-view if you're only gonna spend money on a couple of pay-per-views a year. I don't know if this is the one you get, but you also got Michael Chandler, who is one of the best fighters in the world, in my opinion. A lot of people, if you strictly watch UFC, you probably don't know who Michael Chandler is. And then the undercard, which is free, is going to have Phil Davis and Ryan Bader. I'm actually, getting more excited about this card as I'm talking about it. And then we got Lorenz Larkin, who was recently let go out of nowhere from the UFC. He's going to be fighting for the title against Lima. So out of all these fights, Jeff, any of these jump out at you? And do you think this is worth the buy on pay-per-view?
Yeah, I really like this card. However, I don't know if I would pay the money to, watch it on a pay-per-view. But some really good fights, man. I mean, I have been dying to see Chael Sonnen versus Vanderlei Silva ever since their season of Tough. And even before that, man, like they were just talking smack to each other. Like these guys genuinely do not like each other. I want to see somebody get knocked out. I'm a Phil Davis fan. I also like Ryan Bader, so that's going to be a really good fight.
Yeah, that's a rematch too. So they fought in the UFC, and now they're going to be fighting for the light heavyweight title in Bellator. So that'll be interesting. And Chael Sonnen actually was jumped on the street allegedly by Vanderlei Silva another time in front of his wife. So he's really pissed at Vanderlei, and he's been doing his usual, I'm the bad guy, and I'm selling this fight, and I'm gonna be the heel, and I'm gonna talk trash. But I think this is really personal for him, and I think that may be a first because he usually, plays that angle and plays that bad guy character. But I do think this is a really personal fight for him, and then for Vanderlei, it's personal too because Chael has talked so much shit about Brazil and the people of Brazil, and Vanderlei is not a guy that you want to have mad at you, whether it's in the cage or not. So they've had to keep these two separated. So that's kind of interesting. So not really worth the pay-per-view money, and I guess not worth the ticket money either because this one's right across the river from you, Jeff, living in New Jersey. It's at the Garden. I think it's great for Bellator. I think they got a lot of big names on this card. I think it's a step in the right direction. You and I are both big fans of the competition of the UFC, makes it better for everybody because it forces better treatment of the fighters, and they have more options of places to go and ways to make money, and it gives them some negotiation leverage for their contracts and things like that. Anything else on this card jumping out at you? I'm kind of excited for Michael Chandler. That guy always puts on an exciting fight.
Yeah, dude. Michael Chandler defending his belt, I believe, at lightweight, I want to say. Yeah, so that's going to be really good. Top to bottom, I think this card looks really exciting. I think that Bellator is doing a good job of really stacking the deck and trying to get those pay-per-view buys. So it's going to be good. But like I said, I don't think I want to pay to watch it.
Yeah.
But, I like the card, and I am not opposed to paying for it. Me personally, I wouldn't, just because I'm so used to seeing Bellator events for free.
For sure. All right. So I may change my mind if I'm watching that undercard though, because then you got that title fight with Davis and Bader, and then it's like, all right, well, you're saying there's a couple more titles on pay-per-view and Fedor and Chael Vanderlei. I could be convinced. It depends how they market it. And, Bellator's been struggling a little bit with their live production lately, going through some growing pains, I think. But if it's marketed properly, I could be swayed. And I think a lot of other people could as well. If they're flipping through and they see this on Spike and they see these guys that they recognize from the UFC, and then they say like, oh, Fedor, I've heard of that guy. And I know Chael Sonnen, and he's been on reality TV. Oh, they're going to be on pay-per-view. That could push people over the edge if it's done right. So hopefully it is. Hopefully they do good numbers and they're able to keep bringing in talent and paying fighters a lot of money, and good for them. Hopefully they don't blow it. Anything else we may have missed that you want to get off your chest, Jeff?
No, I think we got all our bases covered. Yeah, I think we're good.
Cool. So you'll continue recovering from your Jello shots then. If you want to get a hold of Jeff, you can get him at @animal_Wilson on Twitter. And you all know how to get a hold of me by now. It's at MMA on the Rocks everywhere on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube as well. So if you want to subscribe to that and get the podcast unedited, I believe they'll send you notifications when we go live, which, we're live right now if you're watching on YouTube. So, hey, everybody. And you can also go to MMAonTheRocks.com and you can contact me that way. So don't be shy. We love hearing feedback. We love a good debate. And we love hearing what you guys are thinking and drinking at all times. So that's all we got for this week. Stay tuned later in the week for the episode with Blake Stevenson, where we talk about Conor McGregor, Floyd Mayweather. For those of you who wanted to hear my take on it, that'll be posted later in the week. So we'll get a double episode this week. And that's all we got. So happy Father's Day, everybody. Cheers. Goodbye.